In today's video, we're diving deep into a growing movement in Canada that's sending shockwaves through the economy. Canadians are ditching American products in response to looming US tariffs, and the impact is already being felt across the nation. Today, we'll explore the origins of this movement, examine the economic statistics behind the trade tensions, and break down what the future might hold for Canada, the US, and North America as a whole. Section 1. The growing movement and what sparked it. Canada is in the midst of a full-scale economic standoff with its biggest trading partner, the United States. While political leaders debate tariffs and trade deals, ordinary Canadians have taken matters into their own hands by changing their shopping habits. At the checkout counter, a quiet revolution is unfolding. The tariff threat that sparked it all. Back in January 2025, US President Donald Trump warned that a 25% tariff on Canadian goods was coming, and estimates suggested these tariffs could cost Canada up to $20 billion annually. A study by the Canadian Chamber of Commerce projected that such tariffs might push food prices up by 10% or more, putting enormous pressure on household budgets across Canada. These tariff threats aren't just abstract numbers. They hit home for everyday Canadians who now worry that items like that $5 bottle of olive oil might soon cost $6 or $7. According to Reuters, US President Trump's actions come amid an overall US trade deficit that hit $773 billion in 2023. With deficits with China and Mexico dominating the numbers, but Canada plays a critical role too. The birth of the Buy Canadian movement. The announcement of the tariffs ignited a grassroots Buy Canadian movement. Social media exploded with images of all Canadian grocery hauls, as Canadians proudly switched from US brands to local alternatives. AEMI International's Pulse study showed that 57% of Canadians would choose domestic products if the price difference wasn't too high. Statistics reveal that for the third consecutive year, the combined value of Canada-US trade has exceeded $1 trillion. To put that into perspective, in November 2024 alone, Canada exported $50.4 billion and imported $42.2 billion from the US, resulting in a positive trade balance of $8.1 billion. More strikingly, 71.4% of Canada's total exports go to the US while 50.4% of its imports come from there. This level of integration is why the tariff threat has spurred such a rapid shift in consumer behavior across the country. For everyday Canadians, the movement means rethinking their daily shopping routines. Imagine walking into your local supermarket and hunting for products proudly marked, "Made in Canada." Grocery shopping now demands extra attention, reading labels, comparing brands, and even checking viral Buy Canadian guides. Families may soon adjust their budgets if prices rise due to tariffs, as even routine items might cost 10% more. Local businesses could see an influx of support, while companies dependent on US imports might face higher costs. These changes aren't only about patriotism, they're about protecting an economy where, according to Statistics Canada, US trade accounts for roughly 17.8% of Canadian GDP and supports more than 2.4 million Canadian jobs. Section 2. The backlash and what's at stake. Escalating tensions and economic tug-of-war. The tariff threat by Trump set off a chain reaction, escalating into an all-out trade conflict. Statistics from the US Census Bureau show that while the US runs a significant trade deficit, with deficits of $295.5 billion with China and $171.8 billion with Mexico in 2024, its deficit with Canada is more complex. In goods, the US recorded a $63.3 billion deficit with Canada, however. When excluding oil and gas, the US actually runs a $30 billion surplus with Canada. These numbers highlight the nuanced trade relationship between the two neighbors. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government is preparing retaliatory measures, including imposing 25% tariffs on US goods worth billions of dollars. Reuters reported that Canada's annual merchandise trade surplus with the US was $102.3 billion in 2024. Down slightly from $108.3 billion in 2023, a sign that even high-level trade balances are feeling the strain. Complex supply chains and cross-border integration. Over 75% of Canada's exports are destined for the US. meaning that any disruption affects millions of jobs and countless supply chains. For example, the automotive sector, where components cross the border multiple times, faces major uncertainty. According to industry sources, tariffs could potentially raise the cost of manufacturing a new vehicle by as much as $6.250, with auto-related imports totaling around $225 billion. In addition, U.S. companies rely heavily on Canadian steel and aluminum. In 2023, the U.S. imported 5.46 million metric tons of aluminum, with Canada supplying 56% of that. Analysts predict that if tariffs force U.S. buyers to seek alternative sources, premiums on metals in the U.S. Midwest could spike from 28 cents to 50 cents per pound or more. Immediate and long-term economic impacts. The broader economic impact of tariffs is staggering. Market analysts from PwC have warned that, if implemented, Trump's tariffs could raise annual costs on U.S. imports from Canada from $440 million to $107 billion and on Mexican imports from $1.3 billion to $132 billion. Moreover, according to a Budget Lab estimate at Yale University, American households might lose over $1.200 a year in purchasing power due to these tariff-induced price hikes. U.S. trade policies have broader implications. 2. The U.S. goods and services deficit increased by 17% in 2024 to a record $918.4 billion. While trade statistics show that while Canada's exports to the U.S. grew by 4.9% in December 2024, its imports grew only 2.3%, helping Canada post its first trade surplus in 10 months of $708 million. For the average consumer on both sides of the border, the trade war brings direct consequences. Price increases. Tariffs can translate into higher prices on everyday items such as groceries, automobiles, and household goods. In the U.S., rising costs could lead to an estimated increase of up to 50 cents per gallon in gasoline prices in certain regions. Job uncertainty. As manufacturers face higher production costs, companies might cut jobs or even relocate operations. In Canada, nearly 2.4 million jobs depend on U.S. trade, and economists warn that even a small shift could result in significant layoffs. Supply chain disruptions. Industries ranging from automotive to electronics might experience delays and increased costs as companies scramble to reconfigure their supply chains. This uncertainty means that products once taken for granted may become scarcer or more expensive. These statistics underscore the immense risks involved, not just for governments negotiating trade deals but for every individual who fills up their car or shops for groceries. Section 3. The bigger picture and what's next. A shift towards self-sustainability and economic independence. At its core, this trade conflict is sparking a broader conversation about economic independence and self-sustainability. Canadians are increasingly questioning their reliance on American markets, with a recent Angus Reid poll showing that 91% of Canadians want to reduce this dependency. This movement isn't a temporary reaction, it's a call for long-term change. Many believe that by bolstering local industries, Canada could not only weather the current trade storm but also strengthen its economy in the coming decades. Government initiatives are already underway. For instance, the Canadian government has allocated $1.3 billion for enhanced border security measures and investments in supply chain diversification. Additionally, the USMCA, which governs trade between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, now faces renewed scrutiny, with both Canada and Mexico prepared to retaliate with their own tariffs, potentially reaching up to 25% on U.S. goods in targeted sectors. Global repercussions and future trade scenarios. The tariff war isn't limited to bilateral relations, it has global ripple effects. Analysts at the Peterson Institute and the Brookings Institution warn that tariffs could disrupt global supply chains. For example, U.S. steel and aluminum buyers might shift to suppliers in the Middle East, India, Chile, or Peru, as reported by Reuters. Moreover, the U.S. trade deficit has broader implications. The U.S. goods and services deficit in 2024 reached $918.4 billion. With the U.S. running surpluses with only a few countries like Canada when oil and gas are excluded. Meanwhile, the U.S. deficit with China, though reduced from record highs, still stood at $295 billion in 2024. In North America, the integration of economies is profound. For example, trade between Canada and the US supports more than 2.4 million Canadian jobs and accounts for nearly 18% of Canadian GDP. On the US side, 34 states count Canada as their top export market, with daily trade flows estimated at $3.6 billion. These figures highlight how a disruption, whether from tariffs or retaliatory measures, could have widespread, long-lasting effects. The long road ahead, potential outcomes and strategic shifts. Looking ahead, there are a few scenarios on the table. Economists estimate that if the trade war escalates and full-scale 25% tariffs are imposed, with reciprocal measures from Canada and Mexico, Canada's GDP could fall by around 2.5% by early 2026, while unemployment might rise sharply. Additionally, the Bank of Canada has modeled scenarios in which prolonged trade conflicts would increase inflation to over 7.2% by mid-2025, a significant jump from current levels. On the US side, tariffs might eventually reduce the trade deficit with China and Mexico, but at a steep cost to American consumers. For instance, a study by the Tax Foundation projects that these tariffs could add as much as $1.2 trillion in tax revenue over a decade. But American households could end up paying thousands of dollars more per year for imported goods. For everyday Canadians and Americans alike, the long-term consequences of this trade war could be profound. Economic uncertainty. As trade policies shift, businesses might delay investments or cut jobs, leading to a less predictable economic environment. Canadian manufacturers, for example, are already bracing for a potential downturn that could threaten thousands of jobs. Consumer prices. Expect to see higher prices on everyday items, from food and gasoline to electronics and automobiles. U.S. gasoline prices might rise by up to 50 cents per gallon in some regions, while Canadian consumers could face similar hikes in grocery bills. Supply chain reconfiguration. Industries may have to reconfigure their supply chains, potentially leading to temporary shortages or delays. This could mean longer wait times for everything from cars to smartphones. Shifts in trade patterns. With global supply chains in flux, you might start noticing that goods once imported from Canada or Mexico are now sourced from entirely different regions, such as the Middle East or South America. This rebalancing could have lasting effects on local industries and job markets. Ultimately, this trade conflict is more than just a policy dispute. It's a pivotal moment that could reshape North American economies for years to come. The Buy Canadian movement, the evolving retaliatory tariffs, and the potential shifts in global trade all point to a future where economic independence and strategic realignment become the new normal. In conclusion, the trade war between the US and Canada, and by extension Mexico, is far from a distant political debate. It is already changing the way Canadians shop, affecting millions of jobs and sending ripples through global supply chains. With the US running a trade deficit of nearly $918.4 billion in 2024, and Canada's deep economic ties with the US accounting for over 75% of its exports, the stakes are incredibly high. Economists warn that if these tariffs escalate, American consumers could lose over $1.200 per household annually in purchasing power, while Canadian GDP might shrink by 2.5% and inflation could soar above 7%. So, what do you think? Is the Buy Canadian movement here to stay, or will the trade winds eventually shift back? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let's discuss how these massive numbers and policy decisions might impact your daily life.